Okay, everybody, hello again. If you're watching this, yes, Emma is here now. We've got her. She's been trying to get on this video for like, what is it, 14 minutes now. Um, if you're watching this, if you're tuning in, if you're seeing this on the Facebook group right now, please comment below and tell us if you can see us properly and if all of this is working. Because if it's not, we're going to just jump off and do this as a recording because this is just too much technology problems. Anyway, Emma, welcome.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me from Australia?
You know what? Actually, it looks perfect now. Like the sound is all, it sounds like it's working. Okay,
Ah,
someone says yes. We have one person telling us that we're good to go. So, you know what? Like, let's just do it. Cross our fingers that this isn't going to cut out and yeah. Okay.
cool. Yeah, tell me.
Okay, so let's just restart from the top. Welcome, everybody. Oh my God, what a nightmare. Okay, so Emma is going to be talking to us today about watercolor, and you can see she's got her fancy Watercolor Factory t-shirt on. And I'm going to get you to talk about that in just a second. But if any of you have questions or anything throughout this video, feel free to put them in the comments below. And as Emma is doing her lesson for us, I'll be able to moderate and fill her in on whatever's coming up for questions. But before we get started with the lesson and painting a color chart, Emma, for those people who might not know who you are, can you give us a little rundown of who you are, all the million things that you do, and maybe even how you got started with all of this stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Emma, also known as Black Chalk Co, and I've been doing arty stuff for the last 3 and a bit years. So I started around the same time as Becca doing lettering, and I still do that. But about 2 or so years ago, I got interested in watercolor just because I wanted to do something more and challenge myself. But what I found was that I don't know, it was really overwhelming. Like the advice was to go buy a bajillion artist grade colors, which I did, and it cost $300. And just like really overwhelming in terms of like, how do I know what colors to use in a painting? How do I do this? How do I do that? So it became my mission to kind of just like break it down and make it really easy and start off with just the primary colors. So I've now been teaching monthly watercolor classes for a bit over a year. So everything is just done with the primary colors, and every now and then we throw in a black and a white. But that's one part of what I do. And then another part which started this year is the Watercolour Factory. So now I actually make my own watercolor. That's how much of a nerd I am and how interested I got in how it all works, and just really trying to dig deeper to be able to just answer questions better for my students. But yeah, I still do lettering, and that's another part of my business. And so is running Penultimate magazine, which is a lettering and calligraphy magazine. And then yeah, I just do the odd stuff every now and then, like workshops, client gigs. I've got a couple this weekend, so a bit of a mix, but lots of fun.
You're just casually like, yeah, I make my own watercolors and I have a magazine and like blah blah blah. But you're just like completely discounting how crazy cool all of that is and also how much work it is. So the fact that you're running all of these things at once is craziness to me.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. So you're not doing that much lettering anymore then? It's more like day to day you're doing mostly watercolor and managing the business stuff.
Yeah, I suppose most of what my lettering is now is for corporate clients. I have workshops and stuff on Skillshare, but haven't taught in person for a really long time just because the travel got a bit much. Obviously, I've got my book that's all focused on lettering, so students come to me for help on that, or the Skillshare classes. Then that's when I get involved. But mostly, it's just corporate clients that I do, yeah, calligraphy and lettering for at the moment, which I don't mind. It's fun.
Yeah. And I don't think you even mentioned the palette etiquette stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's what we're going to get into a little more here.
Yeah, that's like the official unofficial name for my watercolor school. It basically just means palette plus etiquette. So it was all about teaching people the basics and the manners and how watercolor works. But I know it's a bit of a tongue twister and not even easy to spell. So that was a good choice by me. But yeah, that was kind of like a movement slash free challenge that I started about a year ago, last January. And that's where we did all this kind of stuff together as a big group. So it was all about taking 3 primary colors, making yourself a color wheel, then building it into a color chart of 144 colors, and then trying to mix and match to, learn how to make a shade if you don't have it in your range.
And we're not going to be doing the whole 144 color chart today because that's a little bit insane, but you are going to be showing us how to make a color chart just out of 3 colors. So if anybody wants to join Palette, can they do that right now, or is it open or closed, or how does that work? Like I think I spelled it properly and put it up on the screen right now, but I don't know. I don't know if I did. And yeah, I'm sure people would be interested in learning more about that.
Yeah, for sure. The color theory class is free and it's available all year round at learn.blackchalkco.com. And that's where the other monthly classes are as well. And whichever one is there for March is the one that, everyone's doing now, but you can always enroll in a past one if that interests you more, or you just want to go back and take it.
Cool. Just for my reference, since we've been having so many tech issues, if anybody's watching, on my end, it sounds like some of the words Emma's saying are cutting out, but I don't think that that's for everybody. It might just be my internet. So if anybody is hearing the same thing, please let me know in the comments, or let us know if this is working properly, because it's really hard to tell. But I think we should just move right along. So you're going to show us how to make a color chart using 3 colors. Maybe the easiest place to start would be to just walk people through the supplies. And yes, you're allowed to plug your own watercolors because I think they're super cool.
Watercolour Factory, that's what I use. Yeah, we're actually going to do the 6x6 one because the 3x3 would take 2 seconds. But I will turn the camera and we'll have a bit of a look. See if I can't get this. All right. Is it upside down? I feel like it is.
I mean, it's hard to tell because it just looks like color squares.
No, now it's upside down.
Yeah,
oh, wait.
It was right the first time.
Sick. I'm a pro. Yes, that makes sense. Cool. It still feels backwards though. Is it mirrored?
Nope, that looks good.
Okay, hopefully it'll make sense. All right, so this is the big one that we are not doing today. That would take someone who knows how to do color charts about an hour, but if you're new to it, it could take even longer. So we're going to do this little bad boy here. And basically, if you're wondering, what on earth is the point of going to all this trouble of doing this, it's kind of like a 2-part thing. One reason that I wanted to teach it was so that people could see the possibilities out of just 3 colors. I noticed a lot of people were scrimping on their supplies. They were just getting, student grade supplies. They weren't super happy with the results. Whereas instead of buying, 20 student colors, they could have just got 3 artist grade colors and learned how to do this, and then been much happier with their results and much less frustrated with how things were drying and painting on their paper. So one side of it is to show how many colors are possible, but then it's something that you can keep. So for me, if I want to know, how do I get a particular shade, I can just go back to my chart, cross-reference which 2 colors I used, and I would know, and I'll explain further, what kind of percentage of the colors I used, and then I can remix that. And if you're someone who's like super into lettering and calligraphy and you're thinking this isn't relevant to me, I don't need to do something like this. Well, one part of calligraphy is mixing up custom colored inks, particularly if you work for some really fancy clients that might have, Pantone colors that they stick to. Then if you've got a color chart of all the possibilities out of the colors you already own, you can find them on here how to mix them, because you can use watercolor and gouache and acrylic to make ink. All right, is it still working all right? Everyone can hear me, hopefully.
Yep.
Great. All right, so in terms of what you need, obviously paper. I'm going to move this to the side. So we just need some paper, and I'm just using Arches cold press just because it's my favorite paper, but I know I first started doing color charts on just cheap paper because it's not like I was trying to paint a masterpiece and care too much about like watermarks and stuff. So in order to do this one, we need a measured up chart. Mine is 11.5 centimeters by 11.5 centimeters. I hope that people know what centimeters are in countries other than Canada and Australia. But I have a box that's like 1 by 1 for each of the colors. And then I've left 0.5 of a centimeter in between just so I can paint without, touching each color and making them blend. something we do in the class that I've not done today just because you might not have those supplies is instead of ruling all these lines, you can actually just put washi tape, like get really thin washi tape, put those as all the dividers, and then you get that really beautiful moment at the end when it's dry and you can just peel it all off. Super satisfying. So what we are doing is exploring what we can get with our primary and our secondary colours. And if you're not familiar with what primary and secondary colours are, primary is like what we learn at school. It's just yellow, red, blue. And our secondaries are what we can mix in between them. So if we mix yellow and red, we get orange. If we mix red and blue, we get purple. And if we mix blue and yellow, we get green. So we're just going on the basis of, using these three pure colors and then a 50-50 mix to get orange, purple, and green. And we want to have those labeled on both the axes. So I've got here, hopefully you can see, it still looks backwards to me on the screen, but I'm hoping it's showing up okay. I've got yellow, orange, red, violet, blue, green. Same thing across the top, yellow, orange, red, violet, blue, green. So we are looking to find, what combinations we can get by mixing all of these colors together. So we will need some mixing space, which I'll show you in a second. But one thing I will just explain is, we've got two instances on this chart where a color will meet itself. So for instance, we've got a spot up here where yellow would meet violet, but we've also got a spot down here where yellow would meet violet. If we just did 50-50 mixes for both of those, it's kind of pointless filling out the whole chart because it's just going to be repeated on both sides of the diagonal. So what I do in my charts is I try to pick a dominant side where the color on one side will be more prominent in that mix than the one across the top axis. So this is where people get quite confused, but it basically means that if I'm doing the yellow and the violet on this side, I'm going to choose this side as my dominant side. So when I'm doing this mix, I'm going to put more violet in it than yellow. And when I say more, I mean roughly 75% violet and 25% yellow. And then I'm going to switch it when I get to this version of them, violet and yellow, because yellow is on the dominant side. I'm going to put 75% yellow in there and 25% violet. That just means I'm going to end up with two different colors for two different boxes. And, it doesn't become pointless to do this whole exercise for the full chart. And then if I come back to it at a later date and I go, damn, I really like that color between violet and yellow. I wonder how I got there. I can remember this is the dominant side and I've got 75% violet, 25% yellow. Hope I'm not losing anyone there. That's usually where my students get confused, but that's how I like to lay out my chart. So
no, I think that makes a lot of sense. But I was going to ask you, Emma, if you can just, because it's a little bit hard to see the pencil color layout. Can you just list them in the order again so I can pop them up on the screen?
Oh, yeah. So we've got yellow,
yep,
orange, red, violet, blue, green.
Okay, thanks.
And then just repeat that across both axes. All right. That's step one, prepping our paper. And obviously, if you've done it this way, you don't have to worry about anything being dry. You can just keep moving on as you go because we've got that gap between everything. Then we've got our colors. So the whole point of this is being able to start from three. So we're going to start with these three colors, and then I'll show you how to get the other three and prepare that on your mixing space. So when I say mixing space, it can be whatever you like. I use old Kmart dinner plates because they're nice and big and I don't use them anymore and they dry, and you don't have to wash this down the sink at the end. You can always pick that color up and use it again. So I'm going to use two for this. It'll all depend what you've got available, how much room you've got. You might have a folding palette and use that. And basically what I like to do on one of them is have the colors that go down the axes. So have yellow, orange, red, violet, blue, green mixed in puddles here so that I'm not constantly mixing as I go, and so that there's enough to fill out the whole chart so that it just becomes a bit more accurate. And then I've got another plate exactly the same as this, which is where I'll do the little mixes that fill in all the other squares. We also need a brush, and which type you use is totally up to you. I'm just going to use a round brush. This is a size, 8? Just because I'm going to do this really loosely. I'm not going to focus on getting full-on perfect squares. The first time I did this without washi tape, I used a flat brush, so you might want to do that just to keep things neat. But it doesn't really matter as well if you've got washi tape because you can run over the edges a little bit. I want some paper towel, which I've just got up here, just to dab off my brush between boxes. And I've also got a couple jars of water out of frame as well for warm colours and cool colours. I like to keep them separate so that my water doesn't turn to mud and I don't have to change it 1,000 times. And obviously, if you're pre-preparing this, then you just need pencil, eraser, and a ruler. And I think that's everything. So we can get started now. And I'll just explain before we get into the methodology, because it can be quite overwhelming when you've got all these puddles happening, but there is a bit of a strategy to it. So what I like to do with my charts is fill in the diagonal first. And the reason I fill that in first is because that's where each color meets itself. So it doesn't really need a mix. So for instance, here, yellow versus yellow, it's just yellow. Same here, red, red, you just fill that in pure red. And we do that all the way down the diagonal. And then once that's in, I like to start working around it. So these two would be blank. So I would start on my yellow, orange, orange, yellow mix. Then I'd get down here and these two would be blank. I'd start with the yellow, red, yellow, red, orange. Oh my God, I'm going to do that 100 times and confuse you. And work all the way down the chart. And that just means you're not doing it bit by bit all over the place. There's like a nice little flow to it. So it'll make more sense when I start doing it. But essentially what we want to start doing is getting our main colors down.
Emma, do you think you could zoom your camera in a little bit closer to the paper?
Yeah, I think I can just... get that happening. That
yeah, yeah, that's awesome.
Alrighty. Everything's backwards on my screen. Okay. So I'm going to start off with the main mixing area and just create some puddles. So this just saves us from having to re-wet the colors that are in our palette, having to just re-mix, and you know, it keeps them accurate throughout the whole thing. So I just like to do this really messy, just dump it down here, and that's just my yellow. And then I'll do, and I'm clearly not like a type A person. Stuff is super messy. And then I'm going to do red here. And you'll notice that my red is actually more of a pinky magenta color. That's on purpose. So the way I teach color theory is to use more of a, you know, pinky red and more of a cyan blue. And it's just to go off like the, you know, how printers work in CMYK. It helps you get really vibrant colors. And that's often the way with, you know, watercolor as well. If we use a more traditional bright cadmium red, it sometimes creates really dull purples or muddy mixes. So I like bright colors. All right. Blue. If you decide to tackle the big 144 color one, you might need some bigger puddles than these because we do use a fair bit of paint, but not so bad for this one. All right, now I'm just going to mix up the secondary colors next to that now. And I'm just pretty much aiming for, oops, that is still blue. You know, it might not be exactly 50-50 yellow and red, but it's just going to be whatever looks like a mid-orange color. I don't want it to look like pure red, and I don't want it to look too yellowy. So it's kind of just going by eye. Still got blue in my brush. It's great. See how we go. You guys can see that. So that's a pretty decent orange color. It's definitely different to the yellow and the red, so I might leave it at that. Move on to purple. And when you do the big color chart, you have to include all the tertiaries as well. So it's fun and games. It's like, what is it? Yellow, orange, red, violet. It's a lot. All right. Nice. Violet happening there. Is this like the most boring thing ever?
It's like one of those satisfying videos where you just watch somebody do art or calligraphy or any painting, I think. You got the right audience of
Need to work-
people who don't think this is boring.
need to work on my Bob Ross voice.
I was thinking I might be him for Halloween this year.
Oh my God, do it. I don't really do Halloween here. It's getting more popular, but still nowhere near how the States do it, or you guys. All right, last one. Just looking for a kind of a mid-green. We don't want it to look too turquoisey or tealy, which it kind of does. But we don't want it to look lime green either. It's looking pretty good, like a pretty grass green. Alrighty. So before I wash my brush off, I am going to actually use that green and fill in the green by green part of this chart. So you'll notice as well when you do your chart, the pure colors down the middle are going to be a lot more saturated, just because we end up adding a lot more water to the other mixes. So no stress about that. Probably looks black on the screen. It looks black to me. I don't know if you guys can tell it's green.
Yeah, the colors might look a little bit off just because of the video quality, but we get the idea.
They are green and blue. So obviously, if you have all the time in the world, you can do this a lot more neat than I am.
So can you walk us through what colors you're mixing there?
Yeah, so this was green. This is just using our primary yellow and blue. Then that was straight blue, not changing anything about it. This was violet that we mixed up using the primary red and blue. That's the primary red. This is orange that we made using yellow and red.
Okay, so these are all the colors that you just made on your palette.
Yep. So down the center is where each pure color from either axis will meet itself. So we don't do anything more to it once we've mixed it up. We can just plot it straight down there. And then once we've done this part, that's when we start to use those color blobs that I just mixed up to create all these other mixes on a separate palette. I mean, it will depend how much room you've got. You might have a giant mixing space that you can do this all on one, but also for like just getting it straight in my mind, I do separate it so I don't get confused. Right,
can you just move your paper down an inch or so? Yeah, there we go. Someone actually asked a really good question just before we move on. In terms of intensity of those colors, how do you decide how intense to make them? Like how much water to have on them or how pigmented to make them?
Yeah, look, it's not like an exact science, which I know frustrated me when I first tried to do it because I wanted to know like how many mils of water, like tell me. But it's really just getting an idea down. So obviously these are really pigmented. They're not super watery. If you look at the palette, you know, they're starting to dry a bit now. So I will just have to add water to reactivate them. But it's really just to get them moving on your brush and your palette. I like to keep them as pigmented as possible. But again, it's going to totally depend on the pigments that you use. So I'll show you two charts side by side. And this was one I did with professional watercolors last year. And then this is one that I did with my watercolors this year. And you'll see that like mine are a lot more pigmented. And that could be due to two things. It could be the fact that these are just more pigmented colors, which low key they totally are. But it could be because I just used more water in this mix. It doesn't really matter, but I like to think that having them more saturated is better. I might just point out another way people like to do these charts. You know, they'll be at this point, and instead of doing it the way I do it with like a 75% mix and a 25% mix up here, they'll actually just do like a pure mix down here of 50-50, and then they really water it down up here. You might have seen those charts before. It's just like a really intense version down here and then a really watered down version up here. And that's another way to do it too, if you want to get a really idea of like what's the lightest value I could get with these colors versus like the most intense I can get So you could do that too. I just like to have, I wanted to get more out of the colors than just, you know, the values. You can do that in separate studies as well, but it's definitely an option if that's something that's important to you know exactly how dark and how light. But whatever I do, I like to try and keep it consistent. You know, I'll see if a color's too watered down, and I'll try and add to it if I can without totally muddling up the mixture, just to try and keep it consistent. It's a hard question to answer, but I hope that makes sense somewhat.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I like the idea of doing the top in a lighter, like with more water, and the bottom, the darker ones. I feel like that would satisfy me.
Yeah, it looks really cool. Not too many people do them, but it looks really cool. All right, so the way that I do it at this point, once I've got my pure colors plotted down, is I work my way down the chart like this. And this just means I'm doing like mixes at the same time and getting the most out of my paint. Because if I just did orange, yellow up here, use that puddle up, then went down here and did red, green, use that up, you know, I'm wasting paint. So I'm trying to do it in a way that makes the most out of the puddles that I'm creating. So what we want to do up here is we're trying to get two versions of yellow-orange versus yellow-orange. So because this is our dominant side, the one that we put here needs to have more orange in the mix, and the one that we put here needs to have more yellow in the mix. So what I like to do is just start out, I get my blank mixing space. It's going to be hard to show everything on screen. Do you mind if I zoom out a little bit?
No, that's okay. I was just trying to show as you did the diagonal part.
Perfect. All right, I'm just going to lift this up a tad. All right. Cool. And I'm trying to do this carefully so I'm not like clanging dishes around. Fun and games. All right. So what I'm going to do is get my other palette and hold that here and then start to create that mixture for the yellow and orange. So I'm just going to start by taking some yellow from that puddle and putting it over here. And as you can see, it's not a lot because we're only going to use that for two areas. So why, you know, waste the paint? Then what I'm going to do is clean that brush off, and I'm going to add, because I've picked yellow, right? And this is where it might get confusing. Because I've picked yellow, it's going to get darkened easier by orange, if that makes sense. Like it's going to be hard for me to get this color back to yellow, whereas it would be easier to get it to orange because orange is darker. It's just going to take over that mixture. So the way I will then approach this would be, okay, well, this mixture has more yellow in it, so it's going to make sense for me to do that one first. So I can add a tinge of orange, yep, 25, 75, and then I can keep adding more orange to get it back to this mixture. I really hope that makes sense. Right. So what I do here is activate the orange a little bit and just take a tinge, right? Because we're not using much paint. And then I mix that whole puddle in together. Now we have like a yellow-orange. So this still has more yellow in it than orange, so it has to go in this little square here. And you can see it's different to the colours on either side. But because I don't want that mixture to go to waste, I'm going to now make it up for this one, which is orange-yellow, and it has more orange in it. So I'm going to take even more orange from the palette and add it to that. And you might notice at some of these points that it ends up looking somewhere in the middle, like it looks the same as that. If so, you can just add a little bit more. It's not an exact science, and a lot of this is just done by eye. What we really want to do is just be creating mixtures that are different from each other on the chart. The bigger the chart you do, like if you did the 144, there are some colours that look quite similar, but where we can, we want to make them a bit different. So I don't know if you guys can see it, but there is a slight, oh, the sun's coming out, that might help. There's a slight colour difference between these two. So that's that bit done. We're done with that puddle. And then we need to move on to the reds. So how am I going to tackle this one? I'm going to start off with the first mixture, yellow, red, red, yellow. I'm going to do it in the same way because yellow is lighter, it'll get tinged easier. So I'm just going to take yellow, plop it down, and then I'm going to add just a teeny bit of red. And because I use a magenta red, once you do this, it actually comes out like a more traditional red, which is pretty cool. So let's pop that down there because it's still majority yellow. And then we're going to add even more red so that it can go in the other space. Now it's back to being a more pinky colour. Have I lost anyone yet? Is this all still making sense?
Yeah, actually one question just came in. It says, so when you're mixing the secondary colors, you use 50% of two colors to make each. More water added makes the color lighter, less intense.
Roughly 50. As I said, I kind of go by eye because sometimes you can do a 50% mix, but it might turn out, you know, more red than orange. So I just try to eyeball it and find something in between. So it's not really an exact science. If you wanted it to be, it could be, but I wanted to get, you know, a more traditional orange in my mix. So I made it a little bit more reddish. Does that make it more yellowish? Oh my God, now I'm confusing myself. I hope that makes sense because as you can see here, there's even more of like a mauvey color coming through more than a traditional purple. So I probably could have added a bit more blue. I definitely don't do it to an exact science. It's more just by eye. And I think that's where I really got hung up on color theory when I first started, is because I wanted those exact instructions. I wanted to know exactly how much water I needed on my brush and exactly how much pigment to use. But it's really just by eye, you know, it's going to get too hard to try and do it exact. And yeah, these will be really pure down the center, but as we work our way down, and of course, if the puddles start to dry and we reactivate them, they will start to get watered down. This is just purely a guide though to help us get those, see the possibilities from our colors and then get those mixes back in future if we want to be using them. All right, move on to the next one now. So I'm gonna grab my orange, make a little blob because we're doing orange and red. And I'm going to add just a tinge of that for the mostly orange mix, which is over here. So there's just a slight colour difference between those, which is pretty cool. And then we add a bit more red to put it in the last box in that area. I often find that my colour charts look really similar up the top, especially when you're doing all the yellows and the yellow oranges. They seem to look quite similar. So I'll show you on the big chart here. There's a lot of colours that, you know, if you looked closely, they would be pretty similar. All right. So as you can imagine, like once it gets down to this row, and if we were doing the massive colour chart, there's a lot of puddles to mix. So when I start to get, you know, more than a couple, that's when I try and be a bit more strategic about it. So at this point, when we're up to violet and we've got 3 boxes to fill on either side, I'll actually just start by putting down 3 puddles of violet and do it a bit differently. So what I mean by that is I'll do it under here so you can see it in screen. But we've got 3 boxes to fill, yeah? So I'm going to reactivate this paint and make 3 violet splodges, right? Just means, you know, I'm grabbing less violet off the plate each time and wasting hopefully less paint. So the first box we've got here is the mixture between yellow and violet. Now this is going to make some yummy browns because they're complementary colours. So I'm going to start by adding what would be, you know, 25% roughly yellow. So that would be on the dominant side then. That would be, trying to juggle plates, over here. It's still mostly violet. But I'm going to go in now. That's just a bit more of a muted colour. I'm going to go in and add more yellow. Now it's getting into a bit of a yellowy brown colour. That one goes up here. And so that puddle's done now. Now we're on to the second one, which goes there and there. And that colour is orange. So if we go back to our palette, add a little bit of orange to that. We're still in the mostly violet mix. So it's going to go here. I used to hate these colours, but they're actually quite beautiful, really muted. And now we're going to add more orange. And now it should be roughly 75% orange, 25% violet. And that's going to go up here. Really cool neutrals. And then that puddle's done now. And now it's on to our last one, which is with red. So we're going to add a little bit of red. That'll be a nice little movie purple colour. And this is still mostly violet though, so it goes on this side. And then we'll add even more. And that'll go in this one. So I hope that that process makes sense, that you can make this kind of like a production line by putting out your blobs of colour depending how many spots you've got. So for blue, I love this chart, it doesn't take too long. The last one I did was the 144 and it took me ages. I'm going to activate the blue and we're going to put down 4 little blobs. I would normally fill out the other side of the palette, but I just want to keep it in frame for you guys. So I'm going to stack them. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're looking a bit too pale, so adding a bit more in there. All right, now the first one there is yellow. So, oh my gosh.
So Emma, as you're mixing, just an interesting question came up and I'm curious too. So someone asked, so do you need a natural sense or an eye of true color to make yourself a successful chart? So I'm curious, just to add on to that question, like overall, what is the goal of a color chart? Because I think like right off the bat, my answer to that question would be that the goal of that color chart is just so that you have a reference for how to mix colors and you can see what those color mixes look like so you yourself can reference it. Like it's not, the goal of it is not to be like a fancy piece of art that you're going to be able to, sell or anything. It's just for your own reference. So as long as you're understanding which colors made up the swatches, there's no real science to it,
No, and I mean, if you wanted to sell it as art, I'm sure people would buy it because it's very visually pleasing. But as I mentioned, there's 2 main purposes. So first one being, how far can we stretch these 3 colors? How many colors can we get out of them so that we're not having to buy, a full 96 color range from Windsor Newton or a full however many colors from Daniel Smith. We can make pretty much any color from these 3. Bar a few where you might have to add, a bit of white to get pastel colors or a bit of black to darken them. Generally, you can make most colors from 3. So that's why I started teaching it, because I wanted people to invest in quality supplies by just starting small, not spending a fortune, but actually learning color theory and spreading from there. The second one is to use it as a reference chart. So let's just say this is all finished and dry and I go, I actually love this color. That is a beautiful muted purple. I wonder how I could get that again. Instead of, guessing, I would look at this chart. I would remember that this side, my left side, is the dominant side, so that there would be more violet in that mix than orange. So I would know, okay, I just need to get violet and orange and then use more violet than orange to get that color. So it's a reference chart as well as it is, an experiment to see how far you can stretch your colors. In terms of like, do you need a really good eye for color? I don't know. I don't know how color blind I am or am not. It's I just chose to do it in a way that, instead of being 50-50 with all my mixes, taking one swipe of this color, one swipe of that color, I just did it to make colors that were roughly a mid between what I was looking for. So, it makes a bit more sense when you go through the whole class and you actually do the color wheel, because there are the 12 main colors that, make up that big chart. And that's when you see, yellow, orange, red, violet. You see those kind of 12 main colors laid out, and it's a lot easier to see what like a mid color would be. So what was the other point I was going to say? Oh yeah. So another whole reason I wanted to start teaching from 3 primaries and, why these color charts look so pleasing is because when you create colors from just 3, they're a lot more harmonious. They were all made from 3 colors, so they're all related in some way or another. If you've ever painted something and, you've grabbed sap green and then you've grabbed opera rose and then you've grabbed, all these random colors that are from commercial brands and you've just chucked like 16 different paint colors in one painting, you might find there's a lot of competition and it's like quite, it's a lot of contrast. It's quite difficult to look at. They're not relating to each other. Whereas if you actually make those similar colors from, your mix of 3 primaries, they all relate back to each other in some way. They've all got undertones of each other and the whole piece just looks a lot more harmonious. So that's to me the benefit of colour theory and using 3 primaries. And this chart is an experiment to see how far we can get them, but also to keep for ourselves if we want to go back and match a colour in future.
So what would you say to somebody who is worried about the fact that they might be doing it wrong or that theirs might look different than the person's beside them? So another question came up that said basically like it's okay if everyone's chart varies a little bit.
It will literally look different for every single person because you all have different eyes which perceive color differently. You're all probably using different brands, or even if you're using the same brand, you might be using different primaries from that brand, and you will all have different amounts of water on your brush, which may contribute to the dilution of some colors. So that's pretty hard to avoid. Watercolor involves water, and unless you want to be like super precise and dry your brush off every single time and only add, you know, like 1 drop of water to it, it's going to be extremely hard to ever replicate your own work or ever match it to anyone else's. So yeah, this is, I struggled with this as well when I was learning color theory because I wanted precise instructions and I wanted to make sure I was doing it right. But the answer is there just is no right. It's just whatever you get at the time from your colors that's right for you. So we have to just try and, yeah, let go of, you know, am I doing it right? Like you'll be doing it right for you at that point in time with those materials.
Gotcha.
All right, if we go back to our blue now, we are up to blue yellow. So I'm going to add a touch of yellow from my palette and add it to that. And we're still majorly blue though, so it's going to go on this side. These are my favorite rows because they all make turquoise and teal, so they are superior. And we're going to add some more yellow, and we should get like a nice tennis ball green. And we're going to add that over here because now there's a bit more yellow than there is blue in that mix. And then we're on to the next puddle, which is orange. So we're going to add a touch of orange. And these 2 colours are opposite each other on the colour wheel, which is another benefit of making the colour wheel, so you know what colours will turn each other to mud. And blue and orange are 2 of those. As you can see, there's a bit of a brown colour happening now, which will go over here. And that one's done. Now red. Nice purple. It's still mostly blue, so it goes down here. And get some more red. And pop over here. So as you can see, the colours down that diagonal are definitely darker, but as they should be, they're the pure mixes. Last one here is violet. So I add, oops, sorry, keep knocking the stand. Add a tinge of violet. Now I've got a nice blue violet colour. And we'll add a bit more. And fill it in there. Now I've just got 1 row left. Alrighty. So we have 5 greens to go. So I'm just going to move this up a tad. And using the green, the mid green that we mixed up, and plop down 5 spots of green. Alrighty. Now if we add just a tinge of yellow, that will go down here because it's still mostly green. A bit more yellow. Nice yellow-green colour up here. Quite similar to the one before it, but a little lighter. Orange, tinge of orange here. Down on the mostly green side. Tinge more up here. So there is a method to the madness. It makes more sense when you start going in this kind of pattern because your puddles don't get all confused. They're all in a little system. Teeny bit of red, which should neutralise as they are opposite each other. It's still mostly green. As you can see there, that's a really interesting purpley grey colour. And a bit more red, the mostly red side. And up here. Now violet. It's got a lot of red in it, so let's kind of neutralize that again. And more violet. Over to the violet dominant side. Last one. Blue. Running low on blue. Should give a bit of a turquoisey tealy colour. Beautiful. And just a bit more blue. And there we go. Wow. So that's all the mixing spots that I had. You don't have to waste a huge amount of paint. You can keep it quite small. But of course, I made bigger puddles over on the other side just to make sure I didn't run out. So as you can see there, almost ran out of blue, but still got quite a bit of the others, which can be reused if that dries later.
Love it.
Cool.
So would you, and maybe you want to put your face back on here now, and I will too. I'm not talking to your paper. So would you recommend to most people who are doing this for the first time to do like just a messy rough draft, kind of like how you just did, like a quick and dirty one to play with before they set up like a perfect one with washi tape and, you know, get all stressed out about making it perfect?
I mean, yeah, possibly. I definitely have done it a few times now. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, super laggy. I would, yeah, I mean, it's totally up to you, because if you do go ahead and make the big one, that will be quite a time consuming project. It could take an hour and a half. If you've got 3 hours up your sleeve and you want to really, perfect this, then by all means. I made one that was quite rough and ready, like this one, the first time. And then, yeah, I did go back once. Someone pointed out, you know, you could use washi tape for this. I was like, yeah, that's actually a genius idea. So I did go back and do it again. And when I actually retaught the class in the middle of last year, we did it twice. I did actually like try and refine the process a bit, because it was a bit madness before. I wasn't really set up with, you know, like adding blobs all at once and then going and mixing the color with each and like just doing it in a bit of a systematic way. So yeah, you could definitely practice. A lot of people just stress though that, you know, it's a waste of paint or yada yada. As you can see though, I didn't really use that much. You know, all I did was take a couple blobs off my primary colors at the very start, and I didn't go back to them once. So you really don't use that much paint. And it's, you know, people might also wonder, is it easier with pan or tube paint? I don't know, not really, because you kind of have to do the same thing. You have to get it on a palette anyway. I've done it with both. Obviously, I just did it with pan then, which I would say is harder. And again, you know, back to that question of how do I know it's perfect, blah, blah, blah. Like, you're just not, because if you're using it from a tube, it's going to be a lot more pigmented. It's freshly squeezed. Whereas if you're using it from a pan, you're actually going and adding water to reactivate it. So we kind of have to just let go of that perfection, because it will not be the same no matter how many times you do it yourself, let alone compared to other people's. But yeah, there's no reason why you can't use pans or tubes. Tubes will give you a more pigmented result more than likely, purely just because you have to add less water.
But you had mentioned at one point that you would strongly recommend getting just the 3 primary colors of a high quality, like an expensive one, versus getting all the colors of a crappier quality brand.
Yeah, look, there's a few schools of thought around, you know, the best way for beginners to go forward with watercolor. And I can only speak from personal experience and what I've seen, you know, my thousands of students who have done this. I subscribe to the theory that you should split 3 from a high quality artist grade brand. The reason for that is, you know, I just can't justify, like, why go and buy 20 average colors when you could get 3 amazing ones and still be able to get those colors anyway. But it saves you all the frustration of, like, you know, watery weird mixes. You know, there's a lot more filler in student grade. They can dry weird on paper. So for me, that part is a bit of a no-brainer. But again, like, I'm not saying you have to go and buy the most expensive brand and put yourself in debt or whatever. Obviously, if you have a really tight budget and you're just getting started with watercolor, you can go and buy whatever ones you like. There's generally like 3 tiers of quality. There's like really, really crappy, like not even proper watercolor colors that you might find at a news agency or somewhere random that are really chalky. They're not so good. And then if I gave you a comparison between student and artist, if you looked at the Windsor and Newton range, their Cotman series is their student range and their professional series is their artist range. And there are a lot of differences between them. There's a lot more filler in student, so you end up using a lot more paint than if you've got artist. Some of them are also fugitive, which means they will fade over time and you shouldn't use them in final art. There's a ton of stuff that goes into that. But yeah, my school of thought is to, if you can, start with the best and start small, because I found that people have a lot less headaches when they're using high quality supplies, because it's not just that simple upgrade from student to artist when you feel good enough. It's actually quite a learning curve with all your water ratios and stuff. So that would be my recommendation. But
so someone just asked in the chat, what brands, what would be, if you had to name 3 brands, and yes, you can include yours, which brands would you say are the highest quality?
Yeah, well, obviously, I would say my own are great. I make them by hand, so I put a lot more pigment in them, and they're all natural ingredients. But I actually can only recommend one other brand, and it's not because I'm an ambassador. It's just because I've literally not used any other brands, and that would be Windsor and Newton. I just have loved their quality since I was an art student back in school. They were the first ones I ever tried, and coincidentally, they were the brand that was used by all the artists that I were learning from. So I just went to them. Daniel Smith is another one that's really popular within the watercolorists, but I can't give my personal opinion because I don't use it. Senelia, I'm probably saying that wrong. M. Graham is another one, but they've got a lot of honey in their mixture, so it doesn't always dry, and people find that a bit weird. They're probably the top brands, but it's again, it's whatever's available to you. Windsor and Newton's pretty widely available, which is another reason why I like it. We don't get all the fancy stuff here in Australia, but they're even at, stores for office stationery. So it was kind of a no-brainer.
I would say for most of the people who are in the States or Canada watching, that this is the opposite of a good brand, Reeves.
We have that too.
Okay. So that's one of the ones that, you can use it if you're on a budget, but for the price of that whole pack of like 30 colors, you could get 3 tubes of a higher grade one and have an easier time working with them, a less frustrating time.
I totally agree. And yeah, it is expensive though. I think it's a bit better in the States, but here in Australia, one 5 ml tube of Windsor and Newton is $16 to $24, depending on, which pigment. So it is a lot of money, but, if you're going to spend 50, 60 bucks on a set of 12 or 20 student grade, I think you should just change and go get the artist grade for, 3 primaries.
Yeah. Okay, we had one question come up as we were talking about this, just about the lesson in general. So someone asked, does it matter what colors you start with on the axis? Could you use the traditional Roy G. Biv, so ROY GBP?
Yeah, people use color charts for anything. They might have gone and bought 5 random colors of watercolor and they just want to know what they'll all look like mixed together. So there's absolutely no reason why you can't do that. There's absolutely no reason why you couldn't use traditional primary colors or secondary colors. If people are wondering what the primary colors are, generally most brands will recommend them on their website. Like they have a range of 100 colors. They will pick specifically a 3 or 6 primary palette and they'll tell you what those pigments are. If they don't, you might need to reach out for them, but generally they'll list that information, which it just helps artists know how to work with a limited palette from their range. But you could always guess, you could always use whichever ones you've already got.
So what you mean is like Windsor and Newton has 40 different colors of blue, so you don't know which one is their primary blue.
Yeah, so if you jump on Google and you say Windsor and Newton recommended primaries, it'll bring you to a page that tells you their 3 recommended primaries, and then they also have a split primary palette, which means a cool version of each color and a warm version of each color. But then they'll also list that for their student range as well. So Google is often your best friend for me, life. But particularly with art stuff, you can generally find most stuff on there. I have had someone recently contact me. I think it was about Van Gogh. they didn't recommend primary, so I'm actually trying to get that information from them. But most brands typically will have that available for you.
Good to know. Good to know. And then lastly, Cecilia said the watercolor factory paints are amazing.
Oh, thanks, Cecilia. I love you.
So just before we hop off here, can you just tell everybody the different places they can find you for all of these different projects that you do?
I would just start at Black Chalk Co. It's probably the easiest. There's like an Instagram account and a website for everything that I do, but they're all linked from that main one. So that's probably the easiest answer.
Cool. And your courses would be at learn.blackchalkco, you said?
Yes, that's correct.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Emma. I think this is going to clarify some things for people because honestly, like I've never sat down and painted a real color chart, but I wouldn't even have thought that there would be two of the same things meeting in different spots and how to deal with that. So I'm sure I'm not the only one. And thanks to everybody for sticking with us even through the tech issues. We got through it without a tech issue, but the beginning of this was really a nightmare. So yeah, thanks to everybody for tuning in. And Emma is in the Facebook group. So if you finish this video later and you have questions, feel free to toss them in the comments and tag Emma. I'm just going to put it out there and give her a job to answer them for the next little bit. And
love it.
But other than that, I think we're free to let you go about your whole rest of your day because it's Australia and it's not 7 p.m. there.
No, it's 11 and Rhodey's in daycare. I feel like a free woman. Might go get a haircut. Who knows?
Amazing. Cool. Well, thanks again, Emma. It was nice to talk to you and we'll see you later.
Bye.